Got it.
All right. So, interview number two here, Jay Baker. And we have Shawn Weekly, who is pastor of Northeast Community Church here in Pflugerville, Texas, right outside of Austin, greater Austin area. Um, and we're going to continue our conversation about mentoring. Mentoring, I think, is something that we do, even if we don't call it that a lot of times. And so we're going to just dive right in and kind of get Shawn's perspective. We're going to look at his context, how he's done this, and and we'll just jump right into what does mentoring mean to you?
Okay. From my perspective, mentoring is entering into uh, intentional relationship where there are two individuals, or maybe more, uh, but one individual has more experience in a certain area of life, um, maybe more knowledge, and they are sharing uh, their life experiences, their knowledge of a field, their knowledge of spiritual things, um, and imparting those thoughts and ideas to the individual who doesn't know as much. I think it's two way in a lot of ways, in that uh, it's designed for growth, and both parties grow in a mentorship relationship. One grows through the act of teaching, the act of being intentional, the act of pouring. That I know is a real spiritual word. The act of pouring their
Yeah.
experiences to the mentee, and the mentee, of course, grows through uh, just wisdom, knowledge, skill sets, things that they learn. In a way that helps them to grow in certain areas of life. So it's a two-way thing that goes on when you're in a mentor relationship.
Hey, and so let's pause right there before we even go to the next question because that's really good. When you said something about it's an intentional relationship to begin with, but when you began to discuss this whole concept of it being two-way, I think that's really good. And you went into some detail, right? You said that both of them grow in this process, right, through this mentoring relationship. On one end, the one that may know a little more, may have a little bit more knowledge and insight, grows through teaching. And I would even add, patience. And right, God is working on certain character traits in that individual because it's difficult at times to pour into other people, right? Using that language. But I also like how you discussed how the mentee will grow in their knowledge and in their insight, and they begin to grow in wisdom. It's passing things along. In a sermon that I just preached on Sunday at a church in Georgetown, I shared something that I still hold tightly to even today. A friend of mine used to be one of my professors, Napier. He said something to me one time, and I don't think it was just to me. I think it was to some other people that were there as well. But he said, anytime you get some type of new wisdom, right? You're learning some new things, and it's become becomes practical, a new insight or something like that. Give it away immediately,
Mm.
right? And I've 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 put that into practice from the day that he told me that, right? It's I get some new things. These things are really making sense to me. I think God is providing some fresh insights on something that I've been trying to get some insight on. Let me pass this on to the next person. And so when you were speaking about wisdom and understanding and all of this that this mentee would get, I think that's part of it as we're growing in our teaching abilities and just being able to give that information over. I think it's a privilege just to play a part in God helping somebody gain fresh insights and understandings.
Absolutely,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah, and so
Yeah,
that's
and I,
really
and I
good.
like what Napier says is, like, through the act of teaching, we're also learning. I agree with that 100%. Like some of the concepts, even outside of the church, one area that I mentor in is also through technology. And sometimes there'll be a concept that I really can't grasp. I really can't get my head on. We were even talking about this a little bit earlier. And as I'm trying to, if you will, dissipate that information to someone else, and they kind of look at you like, and then you find another way of saying it, you find another way of stating it. And in breaking it down for them, sometimes it gets in you even more, if that makes sense. It's like, oh, I never even thought about it from this perspective or this aspect of it.
Yeah.
But in the moment when I was sharing it, I saw something else that I hadn't seen before as I'm sharing. So yeah, absolutely. It gives you a deeper knowledge of the subject matter when you're teaching it.
Yeah. And I'm glad you shared other areas, because the first interview I did, we talked about spiritual things, but we also talked about other areas of mentoring, as you know, um, like job hunting and learning how to do resumes, and helping people to walk through how you would talk in an interview. So
Yeah.
other type of skills and techniques you can pass along to somebody else. And you know what's interesting is, right, you're doing that even though you're in the role of a pastor, right? And so that's
Well,
it,
well,
it
well. One thing I know a lot of people might not know this, but me and you have been friends for years, and we've had some deep
yeah,
conversations. One thing that we've discussed in the past is, to the spiritual man, all things are spiritual. And so when you're spiritually minded and intentional to be in people's life, and your heart is aligned with the spirit of God to do God's will in relationships, you use whatever you got in your tool belt. You know, if you're a technology guy, you use technology with the purpose of enriching somebody's life so that they might grow closer to God. And so we always lead with the motivation and the intention of this is our purpose in life. And so I got to use everything I got in the tool belt, past experiences, whatever, in order to pour into people that might not necessarily know they need God, but by the end of the conversation, you know, we
yeah,
pray that there's opportunity to share the gospel. We pray there's
yeah,
opportunity for them to say, oh, you're a Christian. I didn't know Christians rock like that. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So yeah, I think that's important as well.
Yes, sir. You use whatever you have in your tool belt. Hey, I like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. I mean, this is nothing new that we've been talking about for over these years, man. And that, I think that's why this is an important conversation, right? Just to, you know, share what this looks like from because you can do mentoring from a worldly perspective, right? But you know, it's different from somebody that have a spiritual background, right? And they walk out their lives, right, spiritually. And
Yeah.
so, you know, those doors will open, right? As we're praying. And even if you never get a chance to jump on the topic of religion or whatever, you still are sharing, right, the heart of God with this person as you're being with them, and all of that. So yes, sir, that's real good.
Absolutely. You know, I have an example, Jay. I go through seasons, it feels like, where God will have me to be doing technology in one person's life. And so, or something else. And I went through the season last year where I had a lot of people who were coming to me for marital advice, and one individual introduced me to a couple that she was marginally kind of going to church, not really. The husband was like, I don't believe in none of that. And they needed help in their relationship. And so I began to counsel them on a weekly basis. Again, it's intentional. I'm like, listen, if we're going to do this, um, here's a time we're going to do it. Here's a day of the week we're going to do it. And so let's do it every week. And we're going to do this. And man, it's so funny that this individual, he's not a believer. He doesn't follow Jesus, anything like that. He respects religion. But I mentored them through biblical relationship advice, and I get phone calls every other month, it feels like. hey man, my friend was telling me about you helped them through this thing. I know you're a pastor, but man, if you can help me and my wife, blah, 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 man, I'm willing to pay, da, da, da. And no, of course I'm giving it away, but it's so hilarious that this person who don't even believe in the God that I believe in, doesn't
Yeah.
believe that the Bible is necessarily true. But I told him up front, I'm gonna give you biblical principles that work. Whether you're Christian or not, it's going to work if you apply what God's wisdom is about these things. And now he's telling all his friends, and like some people are calling
Yeah.
up, my wife, but can you just mentor me, man? Because I see the difference in him, blah, blah, blah. And so, like, you never know when you're entering these relationships how it can be a ripple effect,
Yeah.
and how you can impact other people. So it's crazy, man. Like, again, all the time I get phone calls from random numbers. Hey, man, you help my friend. Can you help me and my girlfriend? Hey, can you help me and my wife? Hey, can you just help me? My wife ain't even got to come to it, Um,
Yeah.
because there are people out there that are searching for things, and they search it out in culture, they search it out on social media, they search it out on all these different areas and elements of life. And so if we're
Yeah.
intentional about, people are willing to listen if they feel that they can get something out of it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
That's good. I mean, I'll say more about that here in just a little bit. Uh, and I think that'll be a good segue. I'm gonna jump straight to question 3. We'll circle back around to question 2.
Okay.
But just because you've already started talking about this, what has God accomplished through you while mentoring? And so you've already started that conversation.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I feel like he's accomplished quite a bit. That was one story. That was one relationship. And again, I get phone calls all the time circling back to that relationship. Their relationship is in a good place right now. They've moved on. We mentored. We went through the mentorship process for about 4 or 5 months, and so there's still fruit coming from that. And I've literally had to come to a place where I have to tell people I can't do it right now. Let's circle back around in 3 months. And they're like, okay, I'll call you back in 3 months, because they're looking for something, and my time now is I can't accomplish all the things that I need to accomplish in some of those relationships. And so I would also say, with my kids right now, my kids are adults now, and I'm a pawpaw now. So two of my kids have had grandchildren now, and so I've got two of my kids have had children now. I'm a grandparent now, and so uh I'm seeing fruit in that. In that, taught them concepts of so many years that at the time they didn't necessarily need it or
Yeah.
didn't think they needed it. And now that they're adults, they're coming back and circling back around to those conversations. And so I would also say, to me, mentorship is for the long haul, even though sometimes we look at people outside the home. I think it's important to pour into and mentor our own children. I love when I watch podcasts or interviews and people say, my dad was this figure in my life, and I wasn't always there in my life. And so now, looking back, I saw moments and opportunities that slipped away, and I'm in a place right now when concerned with not necessarily just mentorship, but relational equity in when we're dealing with people, understanding that right now, what I'm doing right now will pay future dividends if I'm being led by God to lean into these relationships. You don't always see it in the immediacy, right? When you're mentoring somebody, it's like, man, are you not listening to me sometimes? Are you not getting what I'm talking? Because sometimes they have to live out that experience, right? Like, I'm sharing my experience, but they haven't lived it out yet. And so it doesn't really make sense to them. They trust you, they believe you, but they haven't came to the day yet. And so they come back later, they circle back around later, and they're like, oh, wow, like what you said
Yeah.
really is true. And so I love that element of mentorship where it pays dividends later. It doesn't, you don't always see it in the moment. And so I would say, even looking for the future and looking for fruit, sometimes we don't see the fruit has grown yet, but we planted the seed. And so I'm really learning that, like, even if I don't see it immediately, it pays dividends later on.
Yeah. And that makes me think about John chapter 4 at the end of the conversation with the woman at the well. And when his disciples come back and they're like, you know, you need to eat something, he says, my food is, you know, to do the will of the one that sent me.
Yeah.
And then he goes into this illustration about the harvest, right? You're harvesting something that you didn't plant. And I always keep that in mind, that some people have gone on before me to prepare this person. And sometimes I'm reaping, you know, I'm the one that sees that fruit right away, even
Yep.
though somebody else has been doing the works. They
Yep.
planted the seeds, they watered it. And even in this situation with you, especially when you're looking at your children, you had a chance to plant those seeds, water them, and then now you're seeing that fruit. And sometimes, like you said, it pays those dividends later on. And we may not even see the fruit in certain people's lives that we mentor at one point. But that always comes to mind about what you said, that John chapter 4, that I think that's a very important verse, because we get to see that it's other people involved in the process. I'm not always the one that do everything.
Yep.
You know, God gives the increase anyway, but it's sometimes I get a chance to plant seeds and water, you know what I
Yep.
mean? And sometimes I show up on the scene and, you know, we just use you as an example. You may be on a Sunday morning preaching, the person might come in there, seeds have been planted, it's been watered, and then they hear your sermon, right? It's just your comments around the text, the scripture, and they're ready to go then, right?
Yeah.
And you know, you're harvesting some stuff that's already been planted. And
Yep.
so yeah, that's really good right there, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it can get discouraging. Like
Yeah,
it really can get discouraging sometimes when you're trying to mentor people. Maybe sometimes they're not as into the relationship as you think they are, and those kind of things. So I'm of the persuasion right now where I'm not trying to measure my own fruit, because like what you're saying, you never know.
yeah,
You
yeah,
never know what's going on. So I just plant the seed, and as hard as it is when like you spend your time and hey, we meet Wednesdays at 7:30, and at 7:15, hey, I can't make it today. Okay, well, I've carved that time. Okay. Then the
yeah,
following week, hey, I can't make it.
yeah.
Okay. Uh, but yeah, and so you just never know what you plant and how it grows. So I
And you
hope that
know,
answers the question. I felt like I went on a rabbit trail just a little bit.
oh no, that rabbit trail actually leads into that second question that we
Okay.
skipped earlier. Uh, so that second question deals with, what has been your greatest struggle or obstacle in mentoring? And so, like you talked about how discouraging it could be at some times. You talked about you carve out time, you're ready to go, and sometimes they're not ready. Um, I'll even share something from the previous interview. Consistency is one thing um, uh, that was said, right? This
Yeah.
consistency on part of the person that you're mentoring. So, you know, what are some of your struggles or obstacles?
Yeah. So those are definitely in there. Um, Also, one of them that I think a lot of people who are in positions of mentor might not necessarily share as much is um, not feeling like you have something to give at times. Um, and so you have this person coming to you, trusting in you, asking you certain questions, and you just, you do the Scooby Doo, like, kind of, I don't, and not feeling like you have what it takes, because it's extremely humbling for someone to come to you and say, "Hey, I want uh, to have you as an influence in my life in this area of life," and not feeling like you have anything to give. Uh, and so that's a challenge in that not feeling adequate, knowing your struggles. And so one thing that I try to do to combat it is I try to be vulnerable to the person I'm mentoring. Listen, I don't have all the answers. You don't have all the answers, Sway. I don't have all the answers. I don't have uh, any magical abilities to, get you closer to this. But what I do is time and the willingness to build a relationship and to help you. And so saying sometimes let's navigate this together, that can be difficult because some people are like, oh, I came to you. I thought, because especially with my title too, because I have a title of a pastor, right? And so a lot of people who want to be mentored, they want to be mentored in spiritual areas, right? Um, and they might be gifted. Well, God has gifted them in an area that I might not be necessarily be strong with, right? Like, so one thing that I feel like is I'm a teacher with a prophetic bend, right? But I'm not always able to exhort people, right? Because it's just
Yeah.
not my gift set. Like I don't need a whole lot, and that's one thing about our relationship. I don't I I don't feel like although me and you, I think we exhort one another in a different way, like
Yeah.
inspiring one another in those kind of things. But it's not like I need Jay to come and say, "Hey, Shawn, let's go, let's," like
Yeah.
coach me
Yeah.
up, right? And vice versa. You don't need me to, "Hey, Joe, let's go, let's," like we're both. I feel like in our gift sets, pretty much self-sustained, right?
Yeah.
And so the way that we encourage one another is different. And so I'm used to being encouraged that way. I might not necessarily have what a person that I'm mentoring needs in order to exhort them. Come on, let's go. You can do it. You can do it. You can do it. And so I have to shift my mindset a little bit in evaluating what they need and step outside of myself in order to do things that I might not necessarily be gifted at, but I know is necessary. And so that's a real challenge for me because I don't always look from the lens of how I'm not built. And so
Yeah.
that can be challenging because I don't necessarily. And so it's funny. I think I have, like I said, a prophetic bend in my teaching, and my wife is more merciful. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we're talking, oftentimes we talk past each other because she's talking from a point of mercy. She's trying to show mercy in a situation, even when she comes frustrated about a situation, right? When I start speaking more so of this is what God requires in this da 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 da, she might be like, "Oh well, hold on, let's pump the brakes a little bit. Let's look at it from this And I'm like, "Didn't you come to me for help?" Kind of thing. Because she's looking from it from a real merciful position, and I'm looking at it from a position of this is what God would have us to do in this situation, right? And so sometimes I have to take off my hat, if you will,
Yeah.
and look at and say, okay, her heart is to be merciful. Like even as a kid, the person that she looked up to was Mother Teresa, right? And so I got to come from a merciful situation, a merciful mindset to speak into the situation. And so sometimes those things are challenging for me. And
Yeah.
so that's tough. And so through prayer, through trying to navigate, and sometimes, like to be perfectly honest, over the years, I think I might have offended people unintentionally, right? And we know that gets messy and ugly in the church sometimes. I might have offended people or been a stumbling block for people. So over the years, as I've grown, I've had to know that, there's all different types of people. I ask people what their personality type is before we start entering things, what they feel they're gifted in, because I don't want to be a stumbling block for someone that God might have sit in my path to help to get to where they want to get. Because I take it really seriously, Jay. I'm gonna stand before God, and
Yeah.
being a pastor teacher, God's gonna say, "What did you do with the little ones that I put in your path? Did you cause them to stumble, or
Yeah.
did you do everything that you can do within your tool belt to help them grow?" And so, yeah,
Yeah.
so
It's
that's a challenge for me daily because I just got to step outside of myself.
that. Hey, that all of that is really good because it shows where your heart is. And especially that last portion where you talked about you standing before God, and that's the picture I want to paint for people for this New Year's Eve service. It's about being accountable right now to God so that you don't have nothing to worry about when that time does come, because all of us, believer or unbeliever, right? We're gonna have to stand and give an account, words, deeds, all of that.
Yep.
And so, yeah,
Tweets.
yeah. and that,
Yeah.
hey, and that's why that was really good, right? It's man, I taking it seriously because one day I'm gonna have to stand before him, and so I think that's been my push this year. I've been kind of in that vein for some years now, letting people know like you need to take this a little more seriously. But I kind of pumped it up a little bit because I feel like there's an urgency right now. Never been trying to be prophetic or anything, but there's an urgency. I feel that we need to do some things differently, and we need to do them now because nobody knows the hour, right? We
Yep.
don't know when
Yep.
thief in the night can just show up whenever, in the midst of our conversation.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like that's how I feel, man, taking it seriously right now. So I don't have nothing to worry about when that time comes. And
And I would like to make a point of clarification. Because I know when you say prophetic, some people hear one thing. When I'm speaking about when I say prophetic, is not like this is what God's going to do in this, or I'm speaking more from the not foretelling, but the forthtelling.
Yeah.
Based upon the word of God in this
Yeah.
situation, this is what God will require of us, as opposed to,
Yeah.
I don't want to be one of them prophets that gets stoned and say, God said, and this, and this. This is going to happen. And everybody looking around like, with the rocks, boy, you got 15 more minutes, but God better show up.
Yeah. Hey, and
So,
and that's what I'm saying. It's like, man, you looking at the scriptures, and when you get, whether it's a nation or, just it's not good when everybody's turned their hearts away from God, like we see on a wide scale right now.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, I think that's really good, man. It's understanding and trying to prepare other people so that they can understand, like, man, hey, you might want to take your life and everything you do on a daily basis a little bit more serious. You know, it's okay to have your sports team. It's okay to have these dreams and goals. It's okay. But all of this stuff shouldn't continue to take a priority over God's project and his plan. And so that's a lot of what I've been speaking about, whether I'm using, man, I've been spending a lot of time as I've been preaching this year in like Old Testament prophets, and people are like, well, as soon as I say, hey, turn to Jeremiah, people are like, oh man, hold on, what is he about to say?
Yeah.
People get nervous like they do with the book of Revelation. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And one thing that came up as you were just speaking, one thing that happened, Jay, too, in the mentorship relationship that I could share is there was one individual that I've been kind of mentoring since they were teenager, and they're adults now with kids, and we still are in a relationship. They were saying, I used to think like this concerning a lot of world events. I used to think like this. Now I find myself thinking more like you. That's a scary thing, Jay, for me.
Yeah.
I don't want you thinking like me. I want you thinking like, I think Christ would think in a situation. But it goes to show that it's like the Apostle Paul, follow me as I follow Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And that person has taken this relationship seriously, and they've evaluated. And I've never told them in any conversation, you need to think like me on this.
Yeah.
But they've come to me with situations, they ask me questions, and I've given them my mindset on how things should be. And then over the years, they're like, I'm starting to think about these things that I held so dearly years ago, more aligned with the way that you think about things now. That's humbling to me, and that's scary to me.
It's scary at the same time.
Yeah, because I know that these people are actually listening to me.
Yep.
And so that's a challenge, man. And like man, I'm probably more hypercritical of myself than anybody else is going to be. And so I'm just measuring myself by the word of God, measuring myself by what I feel like God is leading me to do. And it's challenging when the world is going against that, and you feel like you're standing going upstream, right? And you leading other people upstream, and it's like, what if I'm wrong? And so I always got to circle back around and say that's a challenge for me, because I'm the measure 15 times before I cut kind of guy.
Yeah.
And so I always got to reevaluate and put people around me to mentor me is another, mentor me is another thing. Like, if I'm being totally honest, I've had a couple of mentors in my life, and it hadn't always ended well with those mentorship relationships. And I don't feel like it was anything on my part, but it's challenging. So anyway, I won't go too much detail in that, but
yeah. I'm gonna share, before I go to the last question, I'm gonna share a scripture just based off of what you just said a minute ago about them thinking like you, right? In Ephesians 5, and this is a sermon I'm actually working on right now for Ephesians chapter 5, not the whole thing, but imitate God. This is verse 1 in New Living Translation. Imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children. And when I actually began to talk about that particular section that I'm going to be looking at right there, part of the imitation is, of course, imitating Christ. The more you begin to follow him, you're going to take on his character and all of that. But part of it is what you said a minute ago, as Paul said, right? Do what I do as I'm doing with Christ. And I think people naturally begin to do that when they see it in action in the lives of those who are imitators, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of contrast in chapter 5 about children of the light versus the children of the darkness, right?
Yeah.
And so people are gravitating to the light that's in you, and they begin to see like this insight and wisdom you're giving me is really practical and it's working. It's I'm getting things accomplished in my life because of this wisdom. And so it's like maybe I do need to think like he's thinking. And
Mm.
whether they know it or not, they're thinking like Christ because you're trying your best to think like Christ. And
Yeah.
I think the grace of God and I think the Holy Spirit is going to provide all of the clarity, even when we don't even do those things perfectly, but we're giving it our all. And so in those times, it's okay if a person is starting to think like you when you're giving your best to think like Christ. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it goes back again. I'm giving you these biblical principles, you know, whether you want them or not. I'm giving you biblical principles. I can't give you worldly principles, right?
Yeah.
And so
That's what's
yeah.
up. That's what's up.
So
See,
final question.
that's why I need you in my life. You are double A battery.
Yeah, man, this has been a good one, man. And um we gonna chop up more and try to do more interviews and all kind of stuff, man. And I'm freeing up time. We might have to get back on some other stuff. We'll talk
Yeah.
about that later.
Yeah. Yeah.
uh so fourth and final question: what are some things you still would like to accomplish as a mentor?
Hmm. Uh, I think this comes with time. Actually, I'm working on a sermon tomorrow about just giftings and things of that nature. And I think it comes with time, but I would like to see more mentors from the people that I mentor, right? I would like to see them turn and say, this has been valuable in my life. So let me turn around and mentor others, And so I think that comes with time. Um, I see a little glimpse of it. And again, I'm going back to my children. I see a little bit in my children where they're pouring into or mentoring other people who are younger than them, being intentional about trying to do those things. And I see now that they're growing in their familial uh, responsibilities. Two are married. That now they're going to have to walk it out in a different way. It was different when I'm saying, hey, y'all should find someone to pour into. And, they're in college and they're pointing to high school kids or middle school kids, right? It's different when you get out the house and you got a husband, you got children, you got this. Now let's see, I think it comes with time to see those things. But I would like to be more intentional about creating more mentor relationships. I'm gonna call it discipleship because it's just kind of the field that I'm in. I'm gonna call it discipleship relationships and telling the people that I disciple, now you go and likewise do what I'm doing, right? And so I would like to see that. To make it a worldly concept, it's like the Greg Popovich or the Bill Belichick coaching tree. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you're seeing the coaches that you poured into now going and
Yeah.
leading teams and they're coaching and they're applying what you've taught with success, right? The Nick Saban or whatever these great coaches in sports, you'll see the people who come from under them and then they have success in coaching and building. And so that's kind of the thing that I would like to see moving forward is that people that I've mentored now mentoring, not only outside of their home, but living in a way that their home is a godly home. And I would like to even see them surpass me. Like ultimately, I would like to see them go further than I can in whether it's ministry, whether it's in computer science, whether it is in the arts, whatever I've impacted their life with, I like to see them achieve way more than I could ever achieve. And I think that's ultimately the big goal for me, the big dream for me.
Yeah, and even and it's interesting you said that because when I was interviewing Pat for the first interview, we were talking and I was like, man, you never know what God may do with what we're talking about in the midst of these interviews. because maybe there needs to be some more intentionality, especially from those of us that come from a spiritual background, right? Walking close with Christ, and we have these things to pass on. Maybe we need to get together and start putting together these principles, and what that looks like, and try to flush out something that we could begin to use as some form of a blueprint, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's going to do it the same way, but core principles that can be used to pass on knowledge and wisdom, insight, and all of that
Yeah.
on to the next, group of people. It could be a younger generation, it could be people your own age or older, but
Yeah.
passing it on and figuring out a way prayerfully, and how they can be prepared to do the same thing. Because
Yeah.
I think if once they stick around for a certain amount of time when you're pouring into somebody, and once they just soaking up all of the stuff and they seeing that you have their best intention in mind, I think at some point, let's just say you've been mentoring somebody for a year. I think at some point, you start thinking about a year two. Why don't I start getting you prepared to be able to do some of the same thing that I'm doing with you? And so I think that's going to be another thing that I want to start praying about and flushing out. And
That's
I
good.
want to pick your brain. I want to pick other people's brain. And I want to just get with some people that are doing something that we can figure out a way to pass some things on. It may turn into a ministry. It may
Yeah.
turn into something. I don't know.
It's interesting that you say that. I'm a big believer in passing the keys. I
Hmm.
got this from a book called Growing Young. Um, and basically it's the idea of when your kids get to a certain level of maturity. Like when we used to grow up in the projects, your mama gave you a key to the house, and boy, you now you got the key to the house, because maybe mama wasn't out off of work when you got to school, and you better not lose this key. Like, so give it, pass it on, or then they get to another age where they can pass the keys to the car. And so that's also a concept that in that book they were breaking it down to ministry. And so I just started passing some resources along to SJ to kind of look through. I've read them, kind of skimmed them, and I say, hey, give me a detailed report on what you see that can be beneficial to doing some of these things in another capacity. And then I also some of the we have a 50 and older life group at our church. They're wanting to pour into some of the younger people, and so I'm trying to put a lot of this stuff together. Next year, we're going to start a sermon series called Generations, where the older people are sharing some of their insights, and the younger people are sharing some of their insights. And so the idea is to have real world people going through this process to see what they can distill and report back to me, and see how we can, like, some of the same things. So I'll be really interested in having those conversations, because from my perspective, I'm built different than the people who are distilling the information and bringing it back to me. And I'm
Yeah.
trying to see what resonates with them, what sticks out to them, and then moving from there. So I'm trying to do it from like a downward up perspective,
Yeah.
because sometimes, again, weaknesses, I got a one track mind. I'm seeing it
Yeah.
from this level up here, and the people that I'm pouring into don't always get the ability to say, hey, it will be easier if this, and this. So I'm trying to, and people who are intentional about that as well, and seeing what they think based upon a framework. And so I would love